All right, good morning and welcome to Counterpoints. Emily, how you doing?
I'm good. I've got a new job, by the way. We should probably mention that I'm now the DC correspondent at Unheard. Switched over from the Federalist after 6 awesome years, but DC correspondent at Unheard. We're going to be doing some stuff on YouTube, actually, so subscribe to the Unheard YouTube. We'll be launching a show. I'll be co-hosting it twice a week and am writing in the meantime, but make sure you stay tuned, subscribe, and we'll be there soon with more.
And congratulations on that. Unheard is kind of cool. It's not exactly left or right. Like, isn't it like kind of, what is it, contrarian or like,
I think contrarian's a good way to put it. Publishes opinions that aren't, with
heterodox?
the herd. Yeah, heterodox. Yeah, but like it really tries to not go in a direction either way. That's like, this is the consensus opinion, you're being pushed by the political establishment. So here's some takes that are kind of different on both sides.
Well, congrats. Looking forward to your stuff there.
Thanks so much. We have a big show today. Actually, we have 2 guests.
That's right. We're going to have a liberal Zionist, which is, I'll be honest, a view that is probably lacking on this program. We have 4 hosts. Probably none of them would consider themselves "quote unquote" liberal Zionists. So we're going to have one who's really plugged in and is going to talk about the negotiations inside the Israeli cabinet to get to a place where they're going to be able to, if they'll be able to accept a peace deal, if Hamas is going to be able to accept this deal. So we'll see about that. And also, 2024 is the year that is going to go down in history as the kind of the most people voting ever in one year. We've already seen hundreds of millions go to the polls in Pakistan, Indonesia. That gets you to over 500 million right there. And just in the last couple of days, we had South Africa, Mexico, and India. Yeah, they all went to the polls. Fascinating developments out of all of those elections, I think, especially for people who watch this show and are unhappy with elites and the direction that they're taking this country. They might be pretty pleased to see the results in some of those countries as well. We'll unpack like why that is. Right,
yeah, you're gonna be covering Modi. We have Juan David Rosas here from Compact. He's gonna talk about the election of Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico. I think that's a much more interesting development than some people are giving it credit for, given that she's sort of AMLO's successor is how she's being covered. But she's interesting because she's different than him in several ways. Now, speaking of Mexico, the big story this morning is, actually, I would say, Ryan, Democratic reactions to Joe Biden's executive order that would cap daily border crossings. We're going to get into all of that right now. Let's put this first element, A1, up on the screen. The New York Times headline is, "In shift, Biden issues order allowing temporary border closure to migrants." Now, some of the details of this, basically, is this went into effect at 12:01 p.m., or 12:01 a.m., I should say, last night. 2,500 crossings, illegal entries is how the New York Times says it. 7-day average for illegal entries hits 2,500 per day. That had already happened. So that's why the order went into effect at 12:01 a.m. So let's take a listen actually to what Biden said when he signed the bill first, or the executive order first. Here he is.
I've come here today to do what the Republicans in Congress refuse to do. Take the necessary steps to secure our border. 4 months ago, after weeks of intense negotiation between my staff and Democrats and Republicans, we came to a clear bipartisan deal. It was the strongest border security agreement in decades. But then Republicans in Congress, not all, but walked away from it. Why? Because Donald Trump told them to. He told the Republicans, it has been published widely by many of you, that he didn't want to fix the issue. He wanted to use it to attack me. That's what he wanted to do. It was a cynical and an extremely cynical political move, and a complete disservice to the American people who are looking for us to not to weaponize the border, but to fix it.
So a lot of that was untrue. I'll just say the part about Donald Trump in particular, because in my own conversations with Republican sources, they say we would have totally opposed that bipartisan border deal, no matter what Donald Trump, if Donald Trump had supported it, we would have opposed it because our constituents would have been so opposed to it. The argument is that it allowed a lot of exemptions. And actually in this case, Biden's executive order also allows for a lot of exemptions. And, they're reasonably debatable exemptions. So unaccompanied minors will be exempt from these caps. So you have to stay below a daily average of 1,500 for 7 days in a row in order for these caps to go away.
And 1,500 what? Like, unpack this for people.
Okay, so it's interesting because a lot of what happens now is not the sort of stereotypical border crossing that a lot of people probably think about. There are still
people like running across the river and
and
scaling the wall.
That does still happen. Absolutely, it still happens. But a lot of people will cross the river with cartel escorts and then just turn themselves in instead of trying to hide from border patrol, go through the desert and totally unnoticed. All of that, they'll simply turn themselves in, claim asylum, and that's why some of this is interesting in and of itself, because the asylum process, a lot of the reporting here is that it's just going to be, asylum is simply going to be cut off with this Biden policy. But I don't know that that's necessarily true, because it's not affecting what's called CBP-1, which is the app that Biden launched. It's still, the New York Times says they're booking almost 1,500 appointments daily through CBP-1, and that's so you can make an asylum claim.
That's an orderly entry into, like, you get an appointment, this is when you're supposed to come to the border, show your app, and then you move through the process.
Right, and the government provides mostly the numbers for encounters at the border, which are so hard to know what that means. They actually do a really poor job providing numbers on asylum, and so some of the reporting again has suggested that Biden's already reduced the number of daily encounters at the border, and that's true. But it's true because a lot of times those encounters are just the people who are crossing actually illegally, like swimming across the river. Border Patrol apprehends them, as opposed to people who are turning themselves in for asylum. We don't really know what the breakdown is of what's happening at the border. We just know that a lot of people are showing up at the border.
And there's also the Mexican role, right? Like over the last 3 months.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, we don't know what exact deal was cut or what domestic interests AMLO had at the time.
That's a good point.
It could be, it could have been election related. We'll talk about that later. He helped to cut down the crossings by something like 50% by basically holding migrants who are coming through, transiting through. These are not Mexicans. Like, we're not seeing a surge of Mexicans across the border, and we're going to talk about that later.
Yeah.
These are people transiting through Mexico, and he was holding a lot of those back.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm reading from The Hill right now. Their headline is that he's limiting asylum at the southern border. That might turn out to be accurate. Again, though, what's one of the really interesting things, I looked up the definition. I actually read through the entire executive order, and it relies on this definition in the U.S. Code of trafficking to exempt unaccompanied minors and people who have been trafficked from the limits. And there are a lot of unaccompanied minors that come, and what the government has found is that when you exempt unaccompanied minors, that's when you end up even with more trafficking and more clever trafficking, where cartels are finding ways to have people who are desperate for their children to get more opportunity, to flee gang violence. I mean, serious, real asylum cases in many instances. It incentivizes this weird trafficking system, horrible trafficking system, where people will send their unaccompanied minors with cartel escorts posing as their fathers or their, uncles or whatever it is. And it creates just a really crazy situation. The exemption on trafficking, I want to read the definition here, pull it up because it's pretty interesting. This is the definition it relies on. I haven't seen this reported a lot of places. The severe forms of trafficking in persons. Sex trafficking in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person is induced to perform such act, has not attained 18 years of age, or the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, debt bondage, or slavery, peonage as well. So if you want to be exempt from this cap, you probably will have a really good case that you qualify for a trafficking exemption under that definition, because every single person who crosses the border and claims asylum has been trafficked. You can talk to people, they pay the cartels. It's maybe 90% is the number. There are some people who, paid to get up to the border, but like you said, they're coming from Argentina and Brazil. And
if you don't pay, they break your legs, right?
They will. Right. I talked to a family, I looked at this little girl who had been held in captivity in a house in Reynosa for 10 days without much food or water, dark, safe house, basically, because they didn't realize they hadn't paid the cartel fee for that region, Honduran family. It was just, people would be shocked if they heard the story.
Right, so it's not necessarily that you need their assistance to get there, it's that if you try to do it without their assistance, they're gonna make you pay. It's interesting because understanding of trafficked is that you've basically, our Hollywood version is a kidnap.
Exactly, yeah,
And
like Liam Neeson.
And this turns it on its head a little bit because you've actually paid. Sometimes you've paid out of extortion at the border. Other times you've paid out of desperation back at home. And the other twisted incentive that you alluded to is the unaccompanied minors exemption, which means you see an enormous number of 16 and 17-year-olds coming to the border.
Yeah.
Because if you're 16 or 17, you live in Honduras, it's now the moment of truth for you. Like, I need to go now or never. And you might have family in the United States. And if you go before your 18th birthday, then you're able to get this exemption. That was the truth before. It was the truth after. We'll see if Trump does anything about that.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. Because what do you do with a child who comes to the border without any accompaniment?
100%.
Just kick them back into the desert? Like, it's an extraordinarily difficult policy and ethical question. Well, I don't think it's that difficult. I think we should be much more welcoming to immigrants. But if you're trying to stop
the borders
people,
guy, like you're
right. But if you're trying to stop people from coming, then it becomes a difficult one. You want to move to the Democratic?
Yeah, and I was going to say that's what's interesting is because the Biden administration is not in favor openly of open borders. It's not like Joe Biden is out there making the libertarian or sort of progressive argument for open borders. He's making this argument as he attempts to look really hawkish, and this is something he could have done at any time, of course, and he's doing it in an election year. 3.9 million crossings, that's a conservative estimate I read in the New York Post today. I think it's conservative, but I think that's probably accurate over the course of the Biden administration. If you cap this at 2,500, you're still up about 1.5 million a year. That's Jay Johnson in the Obama administration said that 1,000 encounters a day was a quote crisis. So capping it there, I mean, we're on a different scale than people realize, and I guess that's where the Biden administration heading into an election year decides to finally do something. We'll see what actually happens. Now, to the point about making the argument honestly, here's how Greg Casar, representative from Texas, reacted. Friend of the show. He was on back in December, I think.
Yeah, talking immigration.
Yeah, talking immigration. Here's how he reacted to the news on MSNBC.
I have real disagreements and concerns with this executive action because I think it plays into the current Republican talking points. You see, the Republican Party here in Congress tries to cover up its own failures by scapegoating immigrants. It's the oldest trick in the book. And they continue to advocate for closing legal pathways to migration and pointing at chaos at the border. Unfortunately, they've created this political pressure that has the president today responding by restricting asylum, which isn't going to work because it doesn't actually reduce the number of people being pushed out of their homes in Latin America. It doesn't actually create new legal pathways for people to migrate here. And so I think we need an alternative, progressive vision for what will work on the border.
Ryan, I've seen a lot of pushback, actually, more than usual, even, I would say, from just sort of Justice Democrat or Justice Democrat adjacent type people.
Even more like Alex Padilla in the Senate, the entire Congressional Hispanic Caucus, which politically is very centrist or moderate, lashed out at this. And when he was pressed, when Casar was pressed, what's your vision here? He said, well, you have to work on what's pushing people out. He said, start by relieving sanctions on Venezuela and Cuba and our kind of hostile policy towards Central and South Americans, which is making it so that they want to leave. Like, people don't actually want to leave. We have a kind of chauvinistic view of the U.S. And good for us. We're proud of our country. We think it's the greatest place on earth. And so we therefore assume that everyone on earth is just clamoring to come here.
Some people really are. I mean, like when I talk to Haitian migrants at the border who were coming from Argentina and Brazil, they were like, I was making just a normal amount of money, wasn't in danger. And I said, well, why did you come? Was it the American dream? And they lit up and they were like, the American dream, but they weren't in Cuba or Venezuela.
And that also wasn't why they left Haiti. Like, they left, those particular people left Haiti to go work basically like to help build the Olympic structures and such in Brazil. And if Haiti were a place where there could be a Haitian dream, most Haitians, I think, would prefer the Haitian dream. Yeah. We did this in like the 60s. We opened up our immigration policy because we thought everybody in Europe would come pouring over here, and we're so racist. Like, that we're like, those are the immigrants that we want, the Europeans. And we got like zero basically from Europe. They were like, no, we're good. It's fine. I mean, America seems great, but it's great here too.
Is the consensus response, do you think, so far from Democrats who are opposing the Biden policy a root causes kind of argument?
Yes, and as Beto talked about in our discussion a couple weeks ago, there really isn't a consensus kind of border policy yet that Democrats have settled on, and they're really being pulled in this kind of reactionary direction that Biden is leading them in, with others kind of pulling back in the other direction. What all of the research has shown in Europe, as the center-left parties became anti-immigrant, they lost vote share to the right, like in every single case. So maybe there's something unique about Biden, that he's just such a spectacular political genius that it'll work for
That's him.
And it didn't work for anybody else who has ever tried it. So setting aside the morality, the ethics, whether it works, whatever, just on a pure cynical political basis, what he's trying to do, which is be less Trump. And he even said in his speech, he said, this is going to sound similar to what Trump did, but we do it with love. He was basically saying, we're not going to accompany this with the rhetoric that Trump used. He cited Trump's rhetoric that immigrants poison the blood of America.
Yeah.
He's like, I would never say that.
Right.
But I'm going to do the same policy, but in a much gentler way. Just from a cynical perspective, that politics doesn't work. Like there are no Trump voters who are like, oh, okay, cool.
Yes.
Then that works for me.
Right.
And there really are, apparently, according to the research, no other voters who were like, oh, well, I wasn't with you, but now I am.
You don't
Because
think
if that was their big issue, they were already with Trump.
If it's their big issue, but I guess I wonder if there are independent voters around the country, this makes them feel more comfortable with Biden. Even if they're not happy with Biden overall, it could factor in to them feeling more comfortable with Biden. Again, though, we're less than a day in, and there's one of the reasons a lot of people, immigration hawks, are coming out on this is similar to the border deal that Biden just said was the strongest thing in the world, or in recent history is how he described it. There's a way to interpret this that could still first of all, it lets a lot of people in. If you're saying we're turning away those credible fear interviews once we hit 2,500 people a day, which amounts to a crazy amount of dollars, actually, for cartels. When you do that, you're still letting in, I think it's 1.5 million people a year, which is a huge number compared to, it's been about 2 million a year. It was around 200,000 during the Trump years, and people probably remember we still were talking about migration as a crisis at the southern border at that point in time. So it's just, we don't know exactly how this is going to work yet, and either way, it's still if Kassar were here, I think we would have a conversation probably similar to what we had with Beto O'Rourke, which I recommend people listen to, I think, for a good sort of debate, push and pull on what's right. I have a hard time with Democrats who aren't openly saying we should be letting in, at least 1.5 million a year, if not more. If that's your position, you should own it like you do, Ryan, because it's perfectly defensible and reasonable. It's not one that I agree with. But if you're saying, we want the border to be safe and orderly, and yet you're still allowing for these exemptions and all of these entries a year, basically you're not doing anything about the root cause in the meanwhile. I know they've made some overtures to, spending more on humanitarian aid in these countries and stationing more people to, tell them about CBP-1 throughout South and Central America. I don't know. It seems like it's sort of a half measure that could, really not end up changing much.
Yeah, that's how most of our policy is done, especially if you can't do anything through Congress. But we have a labor shortage. People seem to hate it, politically when you say it, but it's like the country that can attract young immigrants who then can be productive. Like people tend to think of immigrants as these drains on society, parasites. When in fact, immigrants on net are adding productivity to the economy, just across the board, from everything from the high level, engineering, medical professionals to the low level, to construction and everything else in between. Plus, if you can keep the American education system, the university system, rocking like it has been, which we're not. We're watching it collapse in front of our eyes, but it has been the envy of the world in the post-World War II era. You combine those things, you're going to continue to be the country that is dominant on the world stage. If you're an aging country that is keeping people out, that can't keep up, then who's going to do the work of productivity that you need?
It's absolutely true, by the way, that we are an aging country.
Yeah. Birth rates are declining. We're getting older. Like, that's just a fact. And so you can either have a lot more babies, or you can allow immigrants in, or a combination of the two.
Right.
And immigration is really the part of that equation that is, first of all, obviously easier. It's pretty complicated, and like time-consuming. Like raise somebody to 18 years old, like, if that's your policy.
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I'm not one of those people that's like, we have to stop immigration, all immigration. I actually think, a much more clear system would allow for actual orderly, sensible, logical system that helps us be competitive and does increase productivity without hurting American workers. There's a way to do it, but to your point, it's not how our policy is done these days whatsoever.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.